This is not my downfall. This is their end.
I'm Marcus Chen, 34, corporate attorney who spent 7 years grinding through the big law gauntlet to open my own practice. Picture this, the Meridian Hotel ballroom in Manhattan. Marble floors so polished you could perform surgery on them. Chandeliers hanging like glittering disco balls for people who actually have money. Crystal glasses everywhere. This was the grand opening of Chen Legal Group. My name finally on a door after years of living on gas station coffee and courthouse vending machine food, doing more corporate brown nosing than a politician during election season. I'm standing there in my expensive suit, feeling like I'd finally made something of myself after drowning in student debt that could buy a small island. 7 years of 80-hour weeks, late nights that would make insomniacs weep, all leading to this moment. My moment. Boy, was I spectacularly wrong. Like thinking you're getting a Rolex for Christmas and opening the box to find a plastic watch from a cereal box wrong. First sign something was off. The whispers. You know how it is at these fancy shindigs. People talk behind their champagne flutes like they're sharing state secrets, but really they're gossiping about whose wife is sleeping with whose business partner. Except tonight, those whispers had an electric buzz that made my neck hair stand up like I was about to get struck by lightning. I turned around looking for whoever was catering this circus so I could grab another drink and some of those fancy appetizers that cost more per bite than most people's hourly wage. That's when I saw it, the single most soul-crushing, ego-demolishing, life-imploding moment of my 34 years on this planet. There she was, Jessica, my wife of 7 years, the woman who promised to love, honor, and cherish me through sickness and health and all that alter bees. But instead of standing by my side like a supportive spouse should at her husband's big moment, she was walking across that pristine marble floor holding hands with Daniel Morrison. Not crossing the street hand-holding. I'm talking full, romantic fingers intertwined, like they were starring in some twisted romance novel hand-holding. Let me tell you about Daniel Morrison, because this guy deserves his own category in the dictionary under grade A douchebag, one of the most powerful corporate attorneys in New York. Custom Italian suits, charges more for a single button than most people make monthly. Reputation that makes other lawyers either worship the ground he walks on or plot his professional demise over morning lattes. The kind of guy who has his coffee personally blessed by Colombian monks. And apparently, he also had my wife. But holding hands wasn't humiliating enough for this dynamic duo. They had to go for the gold medal in public humiliation right there under those glittering chandeliers, with half of New York's legal elite watching like front-row spectators at the world's most expensive reality show. Jessica leaned in and kissed him. Not a polite peck on the cheek. We're talking full Hollywood, I'm madly in love with this man and don't care who knows it kind of kiss. The silence that followed was deafening. You could practically hear people's jaws hitting that polished marble floor. Then, like someone had flipped a switch, the room erupted. Laughter rippled through the crowd like a tidal wave of schadenfreude. Rich people laughing at your misery sounds exactly like you'd expect. Sharp, cruel, and expensive. Someone shouted from somewhere in the crowd, "What a spineless husband you are!" The words hit me like a slap across the face. Except slaps eventually stop stinging. This was the kind of humiliation that settles into your bones and makes itself comfortable like an unwelcome house guest. My name, Marcus Chen, which I'd spent years building into something respectable in legal circles, suddenly felt like the setup to a joke I wasn't in on. People were probably already crafting witty one-liners about the lawyer who couldn't even keep his own wife from straying. But the universe wasn't done with me yet. Jessica walked over to me with an envelope in her perfectly manicured hands. Not a congratulatory card. A manila envelope that felt heavier than it should have. Daniel followed behind her like a predator stalking wounded prey, that smirk growing wider with each step. When they reached me, standing there in my expensive suit that suddenly felt like a costume for a play I never auditioned for, Daniel delivered the final blow. "Your first job as a solo practitioner," he said, voice carrying across that ballroom like a keynote speech, "is to finalize your own divorce." He paused for dramatic effect. "Sign it tonight and leave." The envelope felt like it was burning a hole through my jacket pocket. But I wasn't about to give these people the satisfaction of seeing me break down. Not here, not now, not ever. Phones came out faster than you could say viral video. And suddenly I was starring in my own episode of When Rich People's Lives Fall Apart, complete with camera flashes and whispered commentary. Some people gasped, probably the ones with human decency left. Others laughed because watching someone's world crumble is entertainment when you've got money. But here's the thing about me that Jessica and Daniel apparently forgot during their conspiracy planning. I don't collapse. I don't scream. I don't throw punches. I don't make scenes. I do something much more dangerous. I calculate. So I folded that envelope, placed it carefully in my jacket pocket like business correspondence, and walked out of that ballroom with my head held high. Let them think they'd won with their theatrical performance. They were about to learn that Marcus Chen didn't get where he was by rolling over when someone kicked him. They thought they'd ended me with paper and public humiliation, but they forgot one crucial detail. I don't just practice law, I am the law. And class was about to be in session. Walking into my penthouse overlooking the East River after your life gets publicly nuked is surreal. Everything looks exactly the same, but it all feels like props from someone else's play. The first thing that hit me wasn't the familiar scent of that overpriced vanilla candle Jessica insisted on burning nightly, but the oppressive weight of all the crap that suddenly felt like evidence in a case I'd been too stupid to realize I was losing. Take the paintings. Jessica had insisted on these abstract monstrosities that looked like someone had thrown paint at a canvas during a violent sneeze. I'd never understood them, but she'd get this dreamy look spouting off about emotional resonance and the artist's journey through postmodern despair. Now I realized she'd probably been practicing her BS interpretation skills on me for years. The furniture was worse. Every piece had a story involving Jessica dragging me to some Soho boutique where pretentious sales associates convinced us we absolutely needed a coffee table that cost $8,000 and looked like hurricane debris. It's reclaimed driftwood from Maine, the sales guy had explained. It speaks to the organic relationship between nature and human consumption. I'd wanted to tell him it spoke to my bank account getting lighter, but Jessica had already fallen in love with the ridiculous thing. I needed several drinks. I pulled out the good stuff. Macallan 25 I'd been saving for a special occasion. Getting publicly humiliated and served divorce papers definitely qualified as special, even if not the kind I'd hoped for. I made my way to my study, the one room Jessica never touched. Dark wood paneling, leather chairs that actually looked like chairs instead of modern art installations, books I'd read instead of displaying for show. Tonight, I was here for what was hidden behind those oak shelves, my vault that no one knew about. Growing up watching my dad lose everything in a business deal because he trusted the wrong people teaches you to keep cards hidden. The vault contained years of documentation, filed with obsessive attention that would make librarians weep. Binders thicker than law school textbooks, each meticulously labeled with every contract, investment record, correspondence that might become important. Tonight, they were about to become very important. I pulled out the binder labeled Morrison and Associates, silent partnership documentation, and smiled for the first time since walking into that ballroom. This was the good stuff that most people would find mind-numbingly boring, but I found fascinating. My $75 million stake in Morrison and Associates. When Jessica first started working for Daniel, she'd come home gushing about how brilliant he was, how innovative the firm was. Me, being the loving, supportive husband, decided to show support by becoming a silent partner in her boss's operation. Seemed win-win at the time. Jessica got to work for a firm her husband invested in. Daniel got capital to expand. I got front row seats watching my money grow while supporting my wife's career. What could go wrong? Quite a lot, as it turned out. But my cautious business practices, came in handy because every clause was designed with exit strategies. I didn't just hand Daniel $75 million and hope for the best. I structured that investment like a fortress with escape routes and contingency plans. Enough legal fine print to choke a courthouse full of lawyers. The relevant clause was buried in Section 11.4. In case of breach of fiduciary duty by any partner, capital contributions may be retrieved in full without advance notice, provided such breach can be demonstrated through documentary evidence or witness testimony. Breach of fiduciary duty. The magic phrase. Using your position to seduce your business partner's wife definitely qualified. The humiliation at my firm opening, the public kiss under chandeliers, Daniel smirking while handing me divorce papers, all witnessed by 200 of New York's most prominent legal professionals. The whiskey glass beside me was down to its last drop as I went through every document, cross-referencing contracts, checking dates, making sure what I was about to do was legal and bulletproof. Because if there's one thing worse than getting publicly humiliated, it's getting humiliated then arrested for fraud. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. There was a tiny part wondering if I was crossing a line I couldn't uncross. Then I remembered Jessica's face handing me that envelope, how she looked at me like some pathetic obstacle she'd finally figured out how to remove. That doubt evaporated faster than good sense at a Vegas wedding chapel. I logged into Morrison & Co.'s main operating expenses portal. Before you think I hacked anything, let me be clear. I had every legal right to these accounts. Silent doesn't mean powerless or blind. My investment agreement included full transparency on major expenditures, meaning I got to see exactly where my $75 million was going monthly. Boy, had Daniel been living it up on my dime, hemorrhaging money like a punctured artery. Premium Manhattan office leases, client parties costing more than most weddings, and my personal favorite, country club membership fees running $30,000 yearly. 30 grand for the privilege of playing golf with overpaid lawyers complaining about stock portfolios. I started small to see how it felt. Froze the automatic country club payment. Click, frozen. Daniel's weekly golf games were about to get awkward when privileges got revoked for non-payment. Next, lease payments for satellite offices. Daniel had been expanding aggressively, opening smaller offices in prime Manhattan locations. Each lease was secured by my capital with clauses allowing me to freeze funding for fiscal review. I marked every lease payment as pending verification, added notes that all payments were on hold pending comprehensive audit. The real fun started with payroll. I'm not a monster. Junior associates, paralegals, support staff had nothing to do with Daniel's extracurricular activities. They deserved payment. So I was careful, flagging all salary payments for verification errors instead of outright freezing. Verification errors are kryptonite in corporate bureaucracy. They don't stop processes entirely, but slow everything to a crawl while departments figure out what went wrong. Paychecks requiring automatic processing would need manual approval, meaning Daniel would personally sign off on every payment, while simultaneously figuring out why automated systems acted like they'd been hit by computer viruses. But that was foreplay. The main event was my $75 million stake withdrawal form, according to the contract Daniel signed 7 years ago, probably without reading fine print because who actually reads legal documents thoroughly? I could withdraw my entire capital under specific circumstances. I filled out the form, attached relevant partnership agreement sections, added a brief professional note explaining circumstances. No emotional language, no personal attacks. Simple fact statement. Due to documented breach of fiduciary duty as witnessed at the Chen Legal Group opening event, I am exercising my right to immediate capital withdrawal as outlined in Section 11.4. My cursor hovered over submit for exactly 3 seconds. 3 seconds to consider detonating a $75 million bomb under Daniel Morrison's empire. Then I thought about Jessica's kiss, crowd laughter, Daniel calling me spineless. Those 3 seconds were up. Click, submit, request processed. $75 million began its journey away from Daniel's empire and back to my accounts, taking with it the foundation of everything he'd built over 7 years. Game over, Daniel. Class was officially in session. Morning came like a freight train carrying consequences. My phone buzzing nonstop was better than any alarm clock. 124 missed calls, not a typo. The sound of panic spreading through Manhattan's financial district like wildfire in a paper factory. Jessica, 47 calls. Daniel, 38 calls. Various Morrison and Associates partners, 25 calls. Vendors and creditors, 10 calls. And 3 different reporters from legal trade publications who'd gotten wind something big was happening. Jessica's voicemail started reasonable. Marcus, honey, we need to talk about this situation, and devolved to barely controlled desperation by message 47. Marcus, please, you're destroying everything. Daniel's were better. First few maintained usual arrogant composure. Marcus, there seems to be some technical error with our accounts to practically hyperventilating. What the heck do you think you're doing? This is financial warfare. Financial warfare? I like that. Had a nice ring, like I was some economic general commanding spreadsheet armies. I deleted all voicemails without listening completely. I had important things to do, like making proper breakfast and enjoying the first peaceful morning in months. Funny how destroying your cheating wife's boss's financial empire can clear your head. Halfway through the best omelet I'd made in years. Cooking's more enjoyable when you're not worried about marriage falling apart. Michael buzzed from the lobby. Sophie Rivera, Daniel's junior associate and Jessica's personal assistant, was here for a desperate diplomatic mission. Send her up, I told Michael. When I opened the door, I got my first look at collateral damage from last night's financial carpet bombing. Sophie looked like she'd been through a career destruction blender. Usually immaculate hair frizzed out like she'd been running hands through it all night, makeup streaked from crying, clutching a manila folder like it contained eternal life secrets. "Mr. Chen," she said, voice shaky like someone trying hard not to fall apart in front of someone important. "The firm is collapsing. Payroll system failed this morning. 3 vendors threatening lawsuits for non-payment, and Mr. Morrison is having some kind of emotional breakdown." The partners had sent her with a proposed resolution framework. Basically concessions designed to get me to put money back and pretend Daniel hadn't publicly humiliated me while sleeping with my wife. They offered increased profit sharing, formal partnership board seat, even naming rights on satellite offices. Pretty generous offer that might have appealed if I was motivated by money or prestige instead of good old-fashioned revenge. "I appreciate you bringing this," I said, "but I'm afraid I'll have to decline their generous offer." Instead, I handed her my sealed envelope with my actual demands, not designed for negotiation, but to make clear who held all cards. "Deliver this to Daniel and Jessica personally. They have 24 hours to respond." "Mr. Chen," she said quietly, "what's in here?" I smiled at her, the kind that probably looked friendly but felt sharp around edges. "Justice, Sophie. Just a little long overdue justice." At 9 a.m. sharp, precisely because punctuality is a tool when destroying someone's world, I walked through Morrison and Associates' glass doors like I owned the place. Which, technically, I kinda did. The reception area buzzed with nervous energy you see in emergency rooms. Staff huddled whispering, phones ringing nonstop, general atmosphere of holy crap, what's happening? Amazing how satisfying chaos can be when you're orchestrating instead of drowning in it. I made my way through hallways past offices where junior associates frantically made phone calls and senior partners had hushed conversations that stopped abruptly when I walked by. The empire I'd helped fund felt like a sinking ship with everyone knowing exactly who held life preservers. The main conference room was a monument to corporate intimidation. Floor-to-ceiling Manhattan windows, table seating 30, enough polished surfaces to blind someone if light hit right. Designed to make clients feel small and partners powerful, but today had opposite effect. The handful scattered around that massive table looked like shipwreck survivors trying to figure out which direction land might be. Daniel sat at the head, naturally. Even during financial crisis, some people cling to authority symbols. But if he was projecting confidence and control, he was failing spectacularly. Usually, perfect suit looked rumpled, hair disheveled like he'd been running hands through it all night. Jaw clenched so tight I worried he might crack teeth. Jessica sat to his right. Seeing her in this context, not as my wife or soon-to-be ex, but as co-conspirator in her own professional downfall, was surreal. She looked smaller somehow, like guilt's weight was physically pressing her shoulders. Perfect makeup, immaculate outfit, but something hollow in her eyes, suggesting she was beginning to understand the crapstorm scope they'd created. Other partners arranged around the table like chessboard pieces, each calculating survival chances if the firm went under. Margaret Hoffman, corporate litigation specialist who'd always treated me with barely concealed condescension. David Park, mergers and acquisitions guy who thought he was God's gift to high finance. Patricia Walsh, employment law expert who'd probably spent the morning researching whether financial warfare constituted hostile work environment grounds. I took my seat across from Daniel, set my briefcase on the table with satisfying thunk, smiled at the assembled group like we were discussing quarterly earnings instead of their professional lives' complete destruction. "Good morning, everyone," I said, cheerfully professional. "I understand you wanted to discuss my withdrawal request." Daniel cleared his throat, voice strained like someone trying very hard to sound reasonable while internally screaming, "Marcus, I think there's been a misunderstanding. The partnership agreement—" "You're citing Section 11.4, I interrupted, opening my briefcase and pulling out documents thicker than phone books. "Breach of fiduciary duty clause. I brought copies for everyone in case you'd like to refresh memories about what you signed 7 years ago." I began distributing documents with methodical precision of high-stakes poker dealer. Asset recovery terms, withdrawal procedures, legal precedents, witness statements from hotel ballroom incident. Everything laid out in black and white with legal thoroughness making opposing counsel wake in cold sweats. "Here are my conditions," I continued, returning to my seat while they flipped through pages spelling out complete surrender in excruciating detail. Daniel resigns as managing partner, effective immediately. Jessica surrenders any ownership claims or profit-sharing agreements she may have negotiated during her close working relationship with Daniel. I paused, letting that sink in, enjoying Jessica's face flushing red and Daniel's knuckles going white, gripping table edge. Furthermore, I continued, the firm will acknowledge full repayment of my $75 million investment, plus interest at current market rates, plus penalty fees for breach of contract. In exchange, I will assume financial control of Morrison and Associates with full veto rights over all major expenditures and strategic decisions. The silence was beautiful. The kind you hear right before avalanches when everyone realizes the mountain's coming down, and there's nothing they can do to stop it. Margaret Hoffman found her voice first, though it came out as more squeak than usual commanding tone. This is essentially a hostile takeover. I looked at her with patient expression you'd use explaining basic math to slow kindergartners. No, Margaret. A hostile takeover is when someone forces their way into a company against existing management wishes. This is natural consequence of existing management making catastrophically bad personal life decisions. David Park tried next, voice shaking with barely controlled anger. You can't just walk in here and steal our firm because your marriage fell apart. I'm not stealing anything, I replied calmly. I'm collecting on an investment predicated on trust and professional conduct. When that trust was violated publicly and deliberately, our agreement terms kicked in automatically. If you have problems with that, I suggest taking it up with your lawyers. Oh wait, you are lawyers. How's that working out? Patricia Walsh, furiously scribbling notes during the entire conversation, looked up with desperate expression of someone grasping at legal straws. There has to be some arbitration process, some way to negotiate. There is, I said, sliding another document across the table. It's called signing these papers and accepting reality. You have until 5 p.m. today. One by one, I watched them realize there was no way out, no legal loophole, no brilliant strategy saving them from their actions' consequences. Daniel's empire, built on my money and sustained by my trust, was crumbling because he couldn't keep hands off my wife. The pen in Daniel's hand shook like he was defusing a bomb as he signed the first page. Then Jessica, signature barely legible as her hand trembled. Then partners, each acknowledging their comfortable world, had been turned upside down by a man they'd thought too civilized to fight back. When it was over, when the last signature was on the last page and documents were safely back in my briefcase, I stood and straightened my tie. Congratulations, I said, looking around at faces of people who'd just learned a very expensive lesson about underestimating the quiet guy in the corner. You've just experienced justice. 2 weeks later, I found myself standing before a building in Brooklyn that looked like it had been through war and lost. Paint peeling off brick facade like bad sunburn, windows covered with steel grates that had seen better decades, the whole place having that urban decay meets stubborn determination vibe you find in neighborhoods where gentrification hasn't figured out how to charge $18 for artisanal coffee yet. This wasn't where Marcus Chen, newly minted Morrison and Associates owner, usually conducted business. My usual haunts involved marble lobbies, doormen knowing your name and coffee order, conference rooms with views costing more per square foot than most annual salaries. But Patricia Wells had specifically recommended this place, and when a woman with Patricia's reputation for cutting through legal BS tells you to check something out, you listen. The sign above the door read, Unity Legal Collective, in letters probably hand-painted during the Clinton administration. Not exactly inspiring professional Polish confidence, but there was something honest I'd been missing in my world of glass towers and expense accounts. I pushed through the door and felt like I'd stepped into a parallel universe where law was practiced by people who actually cared about clients instead of billable hours. The reception area, being generous calling it that, was basically a folding table with a Y2K surviving computer and a pre-smartphone phone, but walls were covered with newspaper clippings, thank you letters, and photographs telling the story of legal practice measuring success in lives changed, rather than dollars earned. "Can I help you?" asked a young woman behind the desk, looking like she hadn't slept in 3 days, but still projecting energy that could power half Manhattan. "I'm looking for Isabella Torres," I said, suddenly feeling overdressed in my $1,000 suit. "That's me," she said, standing and extending a hand with ink-stained fingers and calluses suggesting she did more than shuffle paperwork. "And you must be Mr. Chen. Patricia said you might stop by." Isabella Torres wasn't what I'd expected. probably early 30s, with fierce eyes suggesting she'd stared down more than a few corporate lawyers, moving with quick, efficient energy of someone managing 17 different crises with only enough time to handle 12 properly. She led me through cubicle maze where young lawyers hunched over museum-worthy computers, phones pressed to ears, navigating bureaucratic nightmares for clients who couldn't afford firms charging $500 hourly for the privilege of being put on hold. We ended up in her office, basically a converted storage closet with a window overlooking a brick wall. Desk, buried under case files, duct-taped bookshelf, coffee maker that looked salvaged from truck stop dumpsters. "Coffee?" she offered, gesturing toward the machine with resigned expression, suggesting she knew the answer was probably no. "Sure," I said, "because sometimes you have to commit to experiences, even when they might involve food poisoning." She poured 2 cups of what might generously be called coffee and handed me one while settling into her chair, which squeaked, protesting the very concept of supporting human weight. "So," she said, leaning back and fixing me with those fierce eyes, "Patricia tells me you've just acquired one of Manhattan's most prestigious law firms, and you're looking for advice on what to do with it. That's not usually the kind of problem bringing people to Brooklyn." I took a sip of coffee, somehow both bitter and flavorless simultaneously, and tried figuring out how to explain what I was doing here without sounding like some rich a-hole having midlife crisis. "I'm having what you might call a philosophical moment," I said finally. "For the past 2 weeks, I've been running a firm specializing in helping corporations get richer and more powerful, and I'm starting to wonder if there might be better ways to use a law degree." Isabella laughed. Not polite professional laughter, but genuine amusement from hearing something unexpectedly honest. "A philosophical moment, that's one way to put it. What would you do with $12 million? The question came from nowhere, direct and blunt, like she was testing whether I was serious or just slumming in Brooklyn for novelty of seeing how the other half lived. "Excuse me." "Hypothetically," she said, leaning forward with intensity, making clear this wasn't really hypothetical. "If someone walked in right now and handed you $12 million to spend on legal services for people who actually need them, what would you do?" I set down my coffee cup and looked around her cramped office at duct-taped bookshelf and squeaky chair and case stacks representing people who couldn't afford justice in a system increasingly treating it like luxury commodity. "What would you do?" I asked. Isabella didn't hesitate, like she'd been planning this exact moment since passing the bar exam. "Hire 40 lawyers, open legal clinics in every borough, provide free representation for tenant disputes, immigration cases, workers' rights violations, go to war against firms that crush families because they can afford better lawyers." The passion in her voice was infectious, raw determination reminding me why I'd wanted to be a lawyer originally, back when I thought the legal system was about justice instead of just another way for rich people to stay rich. "That's a good plan," I said quietly. "Yeah. Well, good plans don't pay rent," she replied, gesturing around the office, clearly held together by hope and stubbornness equally. I reached into my jacket and pulled out my checkbook, the same one I'd used making Daniel Morrison's life miserable 2 weeks ago. This time, though, I was going to use it for something that might actually make the world better. I wrote out a check for $12 million, tore it off, and handed it across the desk to Isabella Torres, who stared at it like I'd handed her a live grenade. "What the heck is this?" she whispered. "Justice," I said, standing and extending my hand. "Or at least a down payment on it." For the first time since the night my marriage exploded publicly, I felt something other than anger or satisfaction. I felt hope. And judging by how Isabella was staring at that check with tears in her eyes, I wasn't the only one. 3 days later, Jessica called. We met at a village cafe to discuss the press statement about the firm's collapse. Instead of corporate spin, we negotiated honest language about personal conduct violations and accountability for actions that violated professional trust. The press release went nuclear. Legal Twitter exploded. Headlines read like, "Power couple implodes," $75 million withdrawal leaves firm in ruins, marriage to merger, how infidelity toppled a Manhattan law empire. The memes were savage. One showed dominoes falling from public affair to complete financial collapse of law firm. Daniel went into hiding. 3 major clients fired the firm. Staff fled like rats from a sinking ship. His reputation became radioactive in legal circles. Can't get clients, can't get partnerships, basically unemployable in Manhattan law. Meanwhile, Unity Legal was expanding rapidly with my funding, winning cases against slumlords. securing workers' compensation, helping families avoid foreclosure. Each victory was small, but they added up to something meaningful, using law degrees for something worthwhile instead of just making rich people richer. 6 months later, Jessica sent a letter from Portland, where she was working at an immigration clinic in a strip mall, helping families navigate bureaucratic nightmares of staying in the country they called home. The letterhead looked like it had been designed by someone's teenage nephew, and office photos showed her in jeans and sneakers, looking more genuine than I'd seen her in years. "I threw away the best thing I had," she wrote, "not asking for forgiveness. Just wanted you to know I'm finally different." I folded the letter into my desk drawer, next to other documents that had changed my life. No anger left, just distant sadness for what she could have been if she'd figured this out 7 years sooner. Columbia offered me guest lectures on corporate ethics. Publishers wanted book deals. Documentary filmmakers called about the intersection of personal betrayal and financial warfare. I was expanding Unity Legal to 3 boroughs while teaching business school students about creative contract enforcement. Daniel's reputation remains radioactive. Last I heard, he's considering moving to Nebraska. Me? I'm living well beyond their betrayal, making it completely irrelevant to my success. Turns out the best revenge isn't destroying someone. It's making their betrayal the catalyst for building something meaningful they could never touch.